I thought what I have to offer really is just kind of an honest, account of how a book gets written, and in particular how this weird book got written. Um, often when I was a student and you'd go to hear a writer talking about his or her work, you get some version of an idea that the writer had this great idea and just did it. You know, I wanted to write about patriarchy through the lens of 13th century Mongolian falconry. You're smart. That has never been my experience in writing a book. So I thought what the small thing I could share with you is just the actual process of how I came to write this book, how it was written, and then what it did to me or for me afterwards. So this might be a little embarrassing in places for me, not for you. A little bit mysterious because actually I don't think it's linear, as I'm indicating. But let me start back I guess it was about 1989 or so. My wife and I had 2 babies, and I was working as a tech writer, and I was struggling to be sort of a realist writer. I had Joyce in mind, Hemingway in mind, and was writing a lot of stories in that mode that were pretty dead. They didn't really come out of the person I actually am, but out of that kind of intellectual aspiration that I might be smarter and more serious than the actual person I had always been. So at one point there, my wife very kindly, we didn't have a lot of money, and a friend of mine was getting married in Mexico, and she said, you just go to Mexico for this wedding, I'll take care of the kids, and you just have an adventure. So I went down, and it was beautiful. It was every young writer's dream. There was a radical Catholic priest. There was a guy who just gotten out of jail. There was all the sort of local politics and everything. So I came back, and I said to Paula, don't worry, I got this. You are sitting on a gold mine. And so I started writing this book, and I was staying up late to write it, stealing time from work, so after about a year, I think, I had this manuscript, and it was 700 pages. Yeah, and just to give you an idea of how wonderful it was, the title was La Boda de Eduardo, which I think means Ed's wedding, so it was Joycean, very few verbs, like that. So, I joke about it now, but at the time I invested a lot in it. We both sacrificed a lot to get at that point. And I thought I had done it. And now I just had to put it out in the world and I could quit my day job. So, but first I wanted Paula to read it. So in the way that writers do, oh, honey, by the way, I finished a little thing. If you want to have a look, it'd be great. So she took it in the other room, and I was looking from, just take your time. What page are you on? So I noticed she was on about page 2, and she was sitting like this. And I just, at that moment, you just know, in that moment, you know everything that's wrong with that stupid book. Why didn't I see it from the first place? So that was a bad day. And I went into work. I was working as a tech writer the next day, and just was in that sort of beautiful artistic space of total loss. I have no idea. I stink, So then one of my jobs was to transcribe conference calls for this environmental company. So I was doing that, and it was really boring and slow. And I just started writing these little Seussian poems, kind of out of the corner of my mind a little bit, just, in that kind of da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. And they were a little scatological, a little funny. And then when I was done, I would just draw a little cartoon on the other page and flip it over, just out of boredom. And I wasn't being serious. I wasn't trying to say anything. I was just goofing around. Well, I brought those home, and I put them on the table, and I noticed Paula enjoying them. She didn't have her head in her hands. She was actually laughing, So something just clicked in me there. And basically it was this. If you're going to write a book, you are going to have to do it out of that which you actually are. You can't contrive some better person and then hover in that person's shadow for 4 years and 400 pages. It has to come naturally out of you. I'm from Chicago, you can hear. I've always relied on laughter. My first girlfriend broke up with me and she said, "You're just always making jokes." And so then I made a joke and we were done. But that's authentically who I am. If I'm happy, I joke. If I'm scared, if I'm anxious, if I'm grieving even, this is just my natural tendency. These cartoons had that quality. There was a quality of doing that which I really love to do. the ancillary benefit was that they didn't know what they wanted to do. They didn't have a big agenda about Mongolian falconry. They just were having fun. Well, what's interesting is there's some part of our minds that really thrives in that atmosphere of what I'm calling fun. Now, I would say it's also something else. It's something to do with getting access to some kind of subconscious power. You don't know where it's coming from. That person in that mode is actually better than you are. Smarter, funnier, quicker to pick up inferences and so on. So, wrote those little poems, and then immediately started writing in that frame of mind. And so I started writing stories that were funnier, faster, kind of snarky, edgy, sci-fi, kind of in my mind, in Vonnegut, Barry Hanna, Monty Python, in that lineage. And suddenly things started happening. I published stories in small magazines, one in the New Yorker, and I thought, okay, I did that thing that they always tell you about, finding your voice. That's what it is. It's related to being honest, somehow. So that was great, and it was a big revelation, and I still believe in it. Very powerful thing to have happen to you. 6 years later, still working that same job, I published the first book, and then have been writing stories in that mode ever since, doing okay, got a teaching job, kept doing it. And that moment for me was kind of like if you were swimming in the Arctic Sea and there was an ice floe, and you got up on top of that baby, it would be really hard to jump off it. You can talk about wanting to be free or wanting to be daring, but that water is cold. And I knew what it was like to write in the wrong mode, and I didn't want to go back there. So fine. Then, so about the same time as this Mexican wedding, Paula and I were down in Washington, D.C., and we were driving around with her cousin, and her cousin pointed up to a crypt on the Oak Hill Cemetery and said, did you know that Lincoln, when Lincoln was president, his son died and was buried in that very crypt for a short time, and that Lincoln actually, supposedly, according to newspaper accounts, went in there on several occasions to somehow interact with the body. I'd never heard that. I didn't know that. And it was one of those ideas that, if you're a young writer, you think, that could be a novel, Now, we had a teacher named Douglas Unger, and Doug said a great thing once. He said, if a young writer could distinguish between what he thinks would be a good novel and what would actually be a good novel, he could save himself about 6 years, usually, And so having just come through this experience with my stories of finding my voice, having that advice in my ears, I thought, to this Lincoln idea, get thee behind me. You're the thing that's going to throw me off track for 6 years. I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. But over the years, as I was writing the books of stories, anytime I felt happy, like personally happy, especially artistically happy, if I just finished the story, my mind would go to that Lincoln book. It was like a kid on a side of a basketball court, like, Coach, I'm your novel. You're not. But there was something really persistent about it. And so at one point I tried to write it. I thought maybe like I had Gore Vidal's Lincoln in mind, that sort of third-person voice. Literally didn't get through a page of it. I went, this is not fun. It's not fun. This is me jumping off the ice floe back into the freezing water. I tried sort of to give myself a little bit of a side job of writing a play about that material. And I spent a lot of time on it, and it never really, you can write a play or you can write a play. And this was the second thing. It just didn't. So I just kept pushing it back. And, it was sort of, I thought, a sort of a functional artistic idea to say, look, you're not everything. You can't do everything. You can do this one small thing that God has given you to do. Just keep doing it. Try to be sort of a low-rent Alice Munro. That would be the goal. Just keep writing stories, And that felt for a while I was proud of it, actually. Proud to be a person who had made a life just with the short story. Okay, so then about 2012, I had a book coming out called 10th of December. And it looked, from the early things, it was going to do okay. And I felt happy. And that Lincoln book came back in my mind. And this time it was in a slightly different flavor. I was saying to myself something like, all right, you're 50, whatever I was, 55. you've written in satirical mode your whole life. You can feel the beauty in this story. To me, that idea of Lincoln being so grief-stricken that he went into the crypt, that's understandable, actually, in a weird way. Then he did that several times. Yeah, I could see that. Why did he stop? What was that? When is the day when you say, I can't do this anymore? Those seem to me, and then all the ideas contained about love for your children, the idea that we love things so much, our whole life is built around the loves that we feel, and yet everything is conditional. Everything is going to come to an end, no matter what. This library will be gone, someday. That idea seemed very profound. So then I was in a position of saying, yes, those are important, profound ideas that I'm thinking about every day, and I'm trying to change my life and my mind to cope with those ideas, but they can't go in my fiction. Why not? I'm too restricted. I'm too small of a writer. I'm too desperate to stay in the ice flow to try to do that stuff. That started to gnaw at me a little bit. I thought, I'm going to be the guy whose gravestone said, avoided that which he most longed to do, which is not. So then I'm sure there are a lot of writers here. One of the tricks that I learned over the years is what I think of and what I tell my students to think of as self-gaming. So really what you're saying is, let me not worry too much about big concepts or how other people have done it or what's appropriate, but let's think about how do I actually produce work that's good? Whatever it takes. It might be superstition, it might be some kind of habit. So I thought, how could I get myself to approach this book that is probably going to fail, just so I could feel that I'd gotten it off my plate? And I thought, well, give yourself a contract. So I said, okay, I'm a 55-year-old person. Nobody really notices where I am most of the time anyway. I'm going to give myself a 6-month contract to mess around with this idea that will probably fail. If I just went on a trip to Asia for 6 months, nobody would care, So I'm going to carve out 6 months and go do this. Okay, so then suddenly you have permission to try this Lincoln book. And if you screw it up, you'll just go back to your old way. Okay, now one of the beautiful things about an idea, when we have an idea artistically, is that instantly any idea is stupid. Any idea, problems arise from the idea. An idea that doesn't have any obstacles is probably not a very good one. You probably already know too well the outcome or the solution. So this one, there's all kinds of obvious ideas. One, as I said, was the voice issue. How do I write, just really, what voice do I use to write the first page of this book? And if you can't get past that one, you're finished. So what I do, sometimes just experimentally in my head, is try different voices. So first, the Gore Vidal approach. On a chilly February evening, Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, I already want out of that book. I don't want it. Okay, maybe it could be first person from Lincoln's point of view. Really? 407 minutes ago, that didn't seem so good. I also kind of wanted to get some humor in it. I felt I wanted to stay, at least keep one hand on the ice flow. You couldn't think how to do it. Then you think, well, who could narrate this story? It's in a graveyard at night. There's just Lincoln and a bunch of dead people. So first you think, well, maybe a grave digger at night practicing, So this is, I think, kind of one of the magical things about artistic process. If you, maybe it's a bit like with your kids. If your kid is having an issue, and you just walk up and go, you seem to be under the dining room table. That's pretty good parenting right there. You just, you didn't say, get out of there. You didn't say, you're not there. You said, I notice you're under there. So with an artistic practice, what I found is if you just say to the book, you're boring, the book will go, no, I'm not. I'm about patriarchy and the falcon. No, you're boring. It's okay. And at some point, the book will go, yeah, I am boring. It's okay. Why? And then the book will actually answer you. So in this case, for me to say, Lincoln book, I really want to write you, but all the voices I'm coming up with are idiotic. And the book went, yeah, they really are. Should I quit you? I don't think so. So you kind of just reside with that problem for a while. And the weird thing is when you do that, in a somewhat cheerful spirit, what'll happen is answers will start coming to you from strange angles. You're not looking for them, they just come. So in this case, there was a handful of things that happened, and I'm not too good at reconstructing the order. I don't really remember, but I'll tell you what they were. I'm getting ready to go on the road with the book of stories, and I've got my mind open to the possibility of this book. Okay, I'm talking to Deborah Treisman, my editor at The New Yorker, who's a brilliant person. And I just sort of confessed, I really want to write this Lincoln thing, and I have this play, but it's not that good. And she just says, why don't you write it as fiction? Now, I was already thinking about that, but just the fact that she said that she could make a connection between that which I had done all these years and this idea was encouraging. It might be possible. I had a talk with a former student, Adam Levin, and he said, I thought, we weren't talking about Lincoln at all. He said, if you ever wrote a novel, I think it would look like a series of monologues, disconnected monologues. And he named a story of mine in which I had done that. That was interesting. I just finished Infinite Jest. And when I thought, that's actually what that book is. It's a series of monologues, brilliant, big, burly monologues. A lot of the action in that book happens between monologues. You don't actually see it. And then I had that play in mind. And there was one detail I omitted earlier, which is simply that back in those days when I was writing a story, I tried another abortive novel. And this one was set in a small upstate New York town. And the shtick was there's a very old woman who's just passed away. And in this world, the convention is when you die and your body comes into the graveyard, all the ghosts sort of pay tribute to you. They tell the story of your life. So I tried to write that book, and it was all right. There was something fun about the dead people, but there was no story, so it kind of petered out after about page 150, and they just threw it away. That book came to mind. And one of the things that was lovely about it was it had a very internet feeling of ghosts interrupting other ghosts. That kind of chat line thing where somebody asks, what's your dog's name? And then 3 pages later you see Fido. That was kind of exciting to me. So all these ideas came together, and I thought, yeah, okay. And I thought, okay, so it's a bunch of ghosts in a graveyard at night narrating Lincoln when he comes in. Can we do that? We can do that, sure. Yeah, that sounds kind of exciting. So then I kind of started. And then, of course, once you do that, more problems arise. But that's okay, because really when you think about it, originality is just dealing with obstructions in a way that's surprising. You can't be original by denying problems, but you can try to deal with them in a way that's organic and fun and surprising. So one of the big problems was this Willie Lincoln story was particularly moving to me when I heard it the first time, because you realize it's happening in the context of the Civil War. Lincoln is at a low point there, and he's got to not only deal with the war, but he has to deal with the death of his child. One of the really tragic details was that Willie and his brother got sick just as the Lincolns were about to throw this big party, very important party politically. And there was some question that any parent will feel, which is, should we go ahead and have the party or should we cancel it? On doctor's advice, the Lincolns decided to go ahead and have the party, and as fate would have it, Willie took a turn for the worse the day after the party. So as a parent, you're thinking, did I somehow, with the noise and my distraction, hasten his death? That's the thing. So the artistic problem that came up was, how do we, in this world of ghosts, how do we convey all that historical backstory without which the story isn't as powerful? So again, you put your mind to that and you start thinking. And eventually, I turned to myself and said, okay, how do you know that stuff? And there, I think what you try to do is not have a big intellectual answer, but just blurt it out. I read it. Where'd you read it? In history books. Huh. And then the book kind of goes, and you say, do you mean I should put the history books in my book? It's your book, So then you get a feeling that I really crave and I really trust, which is a kind of a feeling of, it's an energetic feeling. It's a bit of a naughty feeling, like, I'm going to go blow off a firecracker behind the school, that kind of feeling. So then I thought, yeah, I could do that. I could excerpt pertinent historical sources and just drop them right in there to tell the reader what I found out at the moment I found it out. So kind of fun. You could do that. So I started writing, and I spent a lot of time finding those excerpts and editing them down, not changing them, but editing them down. And at some point, I had this writing shed, and I was on the floor of it with all of these cutouts. I take scissors and cut out the sections, and I had the whole floor covered with them, arranging them for the maximum order, or the optimal order for 6 or 7 days, And I thought, wow, this is not writing. This is avoiding writing. But then at one point, I got them in the right order. Took a lot out, got 6 or 7 of them in just the right order, and this party scene just came to life. It really did, in a very novelistic way. I thought, okay, so now what I seem to be saying is that a writer can also be a curator of sorts. A writer can say, I'm not typing, but I'm arranging sources in a way that gives off light. Okay, that was good. Then I put that all into a file, was reading it, and there was just one moment where I thought, ooh, wouldn't it be cool if someone said this? Rhetorically, wouldn't it be kind of cool if somebody pointed out this? And again, I turned to the book, and the book said to me, it's your book, dummy. Would you like to invent a factual nodule? I said, I really would. Then go ahead. So I interspersed into this series of actual historical excerpts, some that I made up. It was fake news before fake news was a thing. So that was really exciting, and suddenly it gave me a whole different tool with which to make this world. It also, of course, it forces you to make the rules of the universe. So one of the rules I discovered was I couldn't get too flamboyant in the stuff I was inventing. An early pass had all the invented stuff was so brilliant. It was like Pynchon suddenly shows up, and they stuck out like sore thumbs. This is the writer showing off. So then in another draft, the job becomes to tone those all down, make them blend in with the other ones, which was for me a very interesting task because it required me to subdue my ego. Write something that actually was a little mediocre on purpose, that would blend nicely. So all this came together, and the world that it made for me, and again, I want to stress that I didn't know what this fictional world would look like. I didn't know what the rules were. I certainly didn't know what I was trying to say thematically or philosophically. I was really just following the clues of the text, and the text is always giving off a kind of an energy to us. Just like when you pick up a book in a library, you start reading, it either draws you in or repels you. It draws you in a particular flavor. So one of the models that I use to think about editing is you basically have a meter in your head with P over here for positive and N over here for negative. And as you're reading, you can actually sort of keep one eye on that meter, especially when you're reading your own work. You feel the energy of the prose is up in the positive zone, great. Every so often it drops. And we know when it drops. You can feel it. As a writer, what you often do is you try to deny it. Well, it was good yesterday, Or you say, well, this is an important part, so it can be a little dull. To some extent, that's true. But if every time you hit a swath of prose, your needle tanks, it might be that the prose is presenting an opportunity to you. You might be able to make it more logical or more brisk or more honest. And the second part of this model is, when I'm writing a book, I imagine you, the reader out there. I hope that we're in a really intimate conversation where, like in a motorcycle sidecar, I'm driving the motorcycle, you're right here. And when I go left, you go left. When I go right, I go right. When at the end of the story I go over the cliff, you didn't get out, so we're going together. This is it's an interesting idea because it has repercussions for line editing. If I say, the cat jumped onto the black table, the dark expanse, the ebony flatness, I would say by that third repetition, you have moved a little bit away from me, just a little bit. Why? It's a black table. Come on. So at every step along the editing process, you're trying to make sure that the reader is right there with you, or close enough. Or if she's objecting to you, that you know why, and that somewhere down the line you're going to assuage her concerns. this is an interesting process because in trying to bring up your reader and make it a more intimate process, you also tend to elevate your characters a little bit. I think when you're writing, naturally, the characters are below you. It's sort of like me, the reader, you're a little below me because I'm guiding you, and then there's that dope down there that we're kind of looking at. With close revision, you can actually move that person up. The example I use is if you blurted out a first sentence, Frank was a jerk. Okay, that's not a great sentence. And Frank is way down there. In revision, the gods of fiction say, how so? That's how they talk. How so? You say, well, Frank, and now here you're trying to be specific and you're trying to make a more interesting sentence. Frank snapped at the young barista. Okay, that's an example of being a jerk. It's somehow more vivid. It's Frank snapped at the young barista. Gods of fiction say, why do you think he did that? You say, Frank snapped at the young barista who reminded him of his wife, Maria, his dead wife, Maria. So suddenly, just by turning the revision dial a little bit, you've gone from a dismissive, condescending view of Frank, and you're inviting the reader to join you in mocking Frank. Well, now Frank is suddenly a guy capable of love. He loved Maria so much that he can't even be decent in the face of her loss. That's more interesting. He's still a jerk. He still did a jerky thing, but suddenly we've got some kind of... So anyway, this kind of thinking went into the Lincoln book. The book started to talk to me. And not, again, only because I was trying to make it, keep that meter up in the positive zone as I made decisions along the way. One of the things that this did was I was trying to describe these ghosts, which in my mind weren't exactly ghosts. They were something else that I didn't want to name particularly. But every time they would show up in a scene, they were a little bit underdescribed. They were just like with these names, basically. So I was trying to think of how to get the language exciting. And at one point, there's a guy in there named Hans Vollmann who's in this realm because he died just before he was about to consummate his marriage. So I know this about him. You don't maybe know this about him at this point in the book. All right, so he's just about to consummate. And then, so it struck me that one of the reasons these people were in this world is because they either died unexpectedly or they died in a state of unhappiness. They were discontent. This was sort of related to my understanding of a certain sort of Eastern ideas that says, if you want to know what death is for you, look at right now. Look at your mind right now. That's, if the ceiling falls in right now, there you are. And it's a related idea which says, in your present state, you're like a horse. Your mind is like a wild horse on a tether, which is your body. When you die, the tether gets cut, and the wild horse goes crazy. So whatever habits of mind you've cultivated in this life, at the moment of death, it's going to be supersized, and you're going to be all over the place. So I thought, okay, so what if a guy died at the moment his marriage was about to be consummated, what might happen? And then I remembered Dante's Inferno and Beetlejuice. And I thought maybe there's a physical corollary. So he has a tremendous erection that he must carry around with him in all that. So this did two things. First of all, it made that particular sentence more interesting, for sure. And every time he's in the book, you have to account for that, that member. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. It's like if he had a bad foot or he had, so that makes the sentences interesting. It also said something about the world itself. It said something vaguely philosophical, which was when we go into this afterlife, we're bringing our baggage with us. So that was interesting. The other thing that happened in writing this book that was magical, I never had this happen before, sometimes at the beginning of a book, you're basically throwing bowling pins into the air, all your ideas and all your... Then the book is catching them and accounting for them in a way that's interesting. So as I wrote the book by this method, something appeared in it that I had no intention of putting in there, that I didn't even believe in, actually, until I saw it. And this was a pattern, it appears in many forms in the book, of what I would call viral goodness. Like in the book, the characters are all, they've been there a long time. I realized I was kind of modeling the book on a homeless camp that I lived in incognito in Fresno for a week. what happened in that camp was people were so miserable and so lonely and distraught that they would keep telling the same stories about themselves over and over again, mostly to convince the outsider, me, that they were the only sane person in the place, you know. And in telling those stories, they kind of forgot the rest of their lives. They were only this one story about being in the military or how cruel their wife was to them or something. So that started happening in this Bardo world as well. But when Willie Lincoln showed up in the book, suddenly these people, some of them who had been in this state for hundreds of years or decades, started to respond positively to his dilemma. I didn't mean for it to happen, but the book made it happen. And then over the course of the book, all these ghosts started working together to try to save him. And it was a thing in the book. Then I started noticing that happening in the world as well. You know, in other words, especially at a time like this in our country, you think, why should we be good, really? It's all, climate change is all, you know. The book kind of taught me that by individual tiny acts of goodness actually can accrue into larger patterns of viral goodness. You can see somebody doing a thoughtful, civil thing and be incrementally inspired yourself to do the same. Of course, it works the other way as well. You can be a schmuck, and you know, viral schmuckness can happen. So maybe I'll pause there. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah, yes, I have a copy you can buy. It's $8,000.
No, Ed's wedding and Lincoln at the Bardo.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted you to come. Why you started with that book?
Right. Well, I mean, because in that Ed's wedding, I did a lot of things that I would say were modernist things. I was writing very much as I would imagine Joyce or Hemingway or Faulkner or Steinbeck, and it had a kind of deadness that So when I came back to Lincoln, I was really afraid that I would enact that mode again. And so and all these things I'm talking about were ways of getting away from that danger. Yeah.
As I was rapidly writing down notes, because I've listened to you speak before and I didn't take notes, it occurred to me again that this could be equally applied to almost any art form.
I have, when I give this talk and I talk to artists afterwards, they say yes. And I would say even, I got into writing for all the usual reasons. The benefit that I didn't anticipate was that you're basically every day working with your own mind, basically. You're saying, well, you're problem solving. And one of the ways you problem solve is by trying to be very quiet. You know, for me anyway, it means you don't try to have a lot of ideas or themes. Just go to the text and see what it's telling you. That seems to me like I can't do it, but it seems like a pretty good way of life as well. Keep your concepts quiet, go into a situation, listen, see what's actually happening as opposed to what you hope is happening. So that's been really lovely. And also I found that, when the book came out, one of the other things is you tour. So for about 2 years, I was traveling all the time, talking. And now I'm home working, and I notice how much happier I am, one, being home, but also you're in a mind state, I think they call it flow state, but that mind state of concentrating on an object, on your story, I think is really good for us. And that's, for me, after all these years, the big takeaway is that I really crave being in that state. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have I heard correctly that Lincoln in the Bardo is going to be an opera?
Yes, supposedly. There's a wonderful composer named Missy Mazzoli, and they've commissioned it for the Met. So that's great. But then they said, and it'll be in 2028. So I'm just trying to go to the gym every now and then and say, yeah.
Yeah, it lets you use humor over and over again to kind of get past the anxiety of influence of others.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%. I think, what I tell my students is you really have to use what you've got. Now, it's not humor for everybody, of course. We know that. But if you, there's something, in order to step out of the concepts you have about your book and make it interesting enough for someone to finish, you have to kind of get on an updraft of what really is interesting to you. I think that's the trick, And but unfortunately, it's not linear. I can't look at a student and say, oh, you like X, you should do that. It's much more beautiful and complicated than that. But I think from the writers, at least from me, one of the overlooked things is writing actually could be a form of fun. Now, it's not, it's not theme park fun, but it can be a deeply satisfying thing in which you are accessing some part of yourself that you like. That could be that. Yeah.
I was really freaked out when the tendrils start coming around Willie's body, and then the car pops. It was really a horror moment to me.
Yes.
Can you say something about that?
Yeah, and I'll say this. There's kind of two levels. There's the level that my answer is good. Then the other answer is to remember technically, and I don't know that this answer is interesting to you, but they're really the same answer. At that point, the book was asking me this question, and I didn't know. I thought I knew the answer, but I wasn't sure. Is there a cost to Willie staying in this place for a long time? The book said that there better be, because my understanding was there's two stories. One is Lincoln comes in, and we know he leaves, and he goes back to be president. Willie is stuck there, and he either stays there forever or he leaves. That's just logically, that's all that can happen. So then you think, well, I think the best version, the most energetic version is he stays at a cost. That's the one that kind of makes the energy. So then you say, all right, I think I use this phrase incorrectly, but the objective correlative, which is if I have to communicate to you that it's costly for Willie to stay, how do I do that? I could say it, in this world it's pretty costly to stay. That's all right, and some of the people do say that to him, but then you have to prove it. So then I think, how do I prove it? Well, what's the cost of staying? And that's when the intuition comes in. And I don't really know where that particular idea came from, but it serves the purpose of telling you that if he stays, there's a consequence, basically. Yeah. Yeah. But that's not really in the afterlife. I have that on an inside source. No. Yes.
Hi. Well, I love this book, but I also love 10th of December and Pastoralia.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering what you're working on now. Are you working on a novel or missionary stories?
No, what I'm working on now is a book of essays, and I went back. For 20 years at Syracuse, I've been teaching a class in the Russian short story and translation. So we read all the classic 19th century writers, kind of to see what we can steal. So you read a Chekhov story, and these are young writers, so we just talk about how did he make us feel that way here, So I thought I would write a book about that. So I picked 7 of the stories, and I'm just reading those over and over and trying to reflect really frankly on this kind of talk, technical talk. So I've been doing that for about a year, and I'm really just trying to decide what's next. But as I've indicated, a lot of times it's not really deciding, but there's, after writing the Lincoln book, I have a kind of a desire to write in contemporary voice again. That one of the tricky things about this was you had to do at least a simulation of 19th century voice, which for me was difficult. And I found that it had a strange effect, because I got less interested in the contemporary world. Parking bumpers, they didn't exist in Lincoln's day, And part of that was I liked our contemporary American diction. I like to make fun of it, and I like to inhabit it. So I have a feeling it'll be something set now or slightly in the future. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yeah.
I've read the book yet, but I'm going to now. Did you capture Willie's brattiness in the afterlife?
A little bit, yeah. Because there's stories about him where someone said that Lincoln was too indulgent a parent, and the line was, if his sons took a shit in his hat, he would think it was lovely. That was him. So there's a little bit of that, yeah. It's funny you said that. I had just to, sort of in closing, you write a book, you put it out in the world, and then if you're lucky, people read it, and you get to hear their reactions to it. So this one was funny because so many people have come up to me and said, I bought your book. or they'll say, I started your book. and so, I'm interested, and it turns out that a lot of people, some of them even in my family, went up to about page 30 and went, oh my God, and just threw it across the room. Some of those people went back and tried it again, same experience. So I'm not sure why, but I think part of it is that this format that I use, which is basically monologues that have the attributions at the end, some people it doesn't process. It doesn't present images in their mind, and so they walk away. But it's interesting that, I did buy it. It was quite, yeah. In the back, yes, ma'am.
I finished your book. Liked it a lot. My question is, the format that you used with the italics,
Uh-huh.
did that come to you right away? Did you choose that immediately, or did it sort of evolve?
The italics meaning the
The italics when, I think you used it when one of the ghosts was speaking.
yeah, I think if I remember correctly, that was when I think it's when one of the ghosts, the ghost inhabits Lincoln, and then you're actually hearing Lincoln's thoughts refracted through the ghost. Yeah, yeah. And again, those things they just evolve at speed. You think, well, I have to do something to distinguish type of speech A from type of speech B. You know, one of the things that in Frank Conroy, a great memoirist, came to Syracuse once, talked to our students, and he said this beautiful thing. There was a chalkboard, and he drew a big arc like a rainbow. And in one corner, he wrote an R for reader, and another one W for writer. And he said, you know, the W, if that dot is very near the W, that's a writer's writer. That's a writer writing just for the writer. And at the extreme end, nobody could read it. It's so self-referential and personal, no one could get in. If you move it a little bit over, it's maybe Finnegan's Wake, something that you really have to work at it, but clearly Joyce is not that interested in letting you directly in. If you go to the other side where it says reader, it's kind of a, you know, maybe a book you get at the airport that's really light, and its whole idea is to let everybody in, just to, you know. So Conroy said something really interesting for our young writers. He said, now you might think that I'm telling you to put your dot right in the middle of that arc. He said, I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is take responsibility for wherever you place your book. So if you write a book that's very difficult and insular and you don't really care about the reader, then you don't really get to complain when it's read that way. Likewise, when you write when it's so accessible that it's almost, you know, ridiculously egalitarian and nobody thinks it's a complex masterpiece, you have to be happy with that. So I love that idea that you take responsibility for your own book. With this one, my thought was, and I proved this to myself by rewriting the hell out of the beginning, even though I'm going to leave some people out of the beginning, some people are going to throw the book away, I think I'm going to get a core of readers who by the time they get to the end are going to get an extra benefit that is totally related to all of the coding that we did at the beginning between us. You know, for example, one thing is the ghosts always have lowercase names. If you pick that up on page 3, you carry that with you, and it makes the ending better. You know. Anyway, so thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it.